Well, hello there, you're watching the press preview, a first look at what is on the front pages. Time to see then what is making the headlines with the politics editor for the online magazine Gal-dem, Moya Lothian-Mclean, and the chief executive of Conservative Home, Mark Wallace. Welcome to both of you. So, front pages then, let's take a look, shall we? Starting with the Eye. Though Boris Johnson has insisted fuel supplies could soon be back to normal, the Eye predicts queues could continue for days to come. The Times goes further, suggesting the disruption at the pumps could last for a month. The Prime Minister is now in a battle to save Christmas, according to the Daily Mail, which says lorry driver shortages and supply chain chaos could ruin festivities. As reports emerge of fistfights at petrol stations, the Metro declares we've had our fill. The Telegraph, meanwhile, reporting on renewed tensions between the French and British governments over who has the right to fish in UK waters. The Guardian is reporting the Labour leader Sir Keir Starmer will use his conference speech tomorrow to say the government are lost in the woods. According to the Financial Times, the chair of America's central bank, the Federal Reserve, has warned that the US government risks running out of money if it shuts down later this week. So let's get the thoughts then of Moya and Mark. Welcome to both of you. Moya, let's go to the Eye first of all then. Despite first the Transport Secretary and then the Prime Minister with the central message that the situation is stabilising, the Eye suggesting queues could last for days and the Times we caught a glimpse of there suggesting a month. Presumably everybody just wishing this away now.
It certainly seems like it. I think in the first place, something Grand Chap says today was that only 37% of pumps were no longer running dry. The fact that even 37% of pumps could even be considered to be running dry is a travesty. And we've seen so many cases across the UK with this fuel shortage. Key workers saying they cannot get to their workplaces. We've had stories about carers who can't go and care for residents in private areas, not private areas, rural areas. We've seen just the disasters it's caused. It's affected things outside of people travelling in cars too. So you see these queues on the road, these long lines of traffic. People who are taking public transport, like buses, are stuck in them as well. It's been absolute chaos. And I think no amount of wishing it away is going to make us forget it in a hurry. At least I hope it won't.
Yes, and this leads to all sorts of questions that so far the government is batting off. For example, on immigration, which we'll come to in a bit, Mark, but also on that issue raised by Moya about key workers. Not necessary for the moment, presumably just hoping that this will come to a natural end as they put it, tanks are full.
Well, I think there are some pretty fundamental reasons why a crisis like this, a kind of panic buy rush like this, even with some real constraints on supply and delivery, is to a certain extent time limited. The first reason for it is how much space does your average person have to keep on storing more and more petrol? Compare it to, say, the toilet roll rush of early in the pandemic last year, when, again, you had enough toilet roll in the country, the problems with supply getting it to the shops, but just about everybody has space to store weeks and weeks and weeks worth of toilet roll somewhere in their house. It's kind of easily stackable and squishable. Petrol, not so much. You fill up your tank, maybe you've got a petrol can with a few litres you could fill in. After that point, you just start running out of places to put the stuff, mercifully. The interesting question then is, are there some of these queues that are being made up of people, for example, who are topping up relatively small amounts because they're worried about the idea of forthcoming shortages? One of the ideas I've heard floated in the last few days is the idea not just of, say, a maximum spend on a forecourt, but a minimum spend to stop someone, say, joining a queue and then putting 5, 6, 7 quid's worth of petrol just to fill up the very top of their tank. But it does seem like, while some of this shortage has been a real delivery problem, obviously a lot of it's been panic buying, and there is a limit to how much you can keep on panic buying petrol. You can't just keep it in a bin bag somewhere.
Yeah, but you panic buy because you know other people will go and get fuel. So it's this self-fulfilling prophecy. And the question is, do you blame people for doing it? Is that the right way to try and calm behaviours? And certainly some behavioural psychologists suggest not, Moya.
Well, I completely agree. You can't blame the public for panicking when there's a clear fuel shortage in the first place. Well, a government source said today that 16% of all petrol stations were now fully supplied with fuel. That does suggest to me there's been a fuel crisis, and we know it. I think to deny that anything has gone on is doing the same as the government is doing, which is trying to pull the wool over what we're seeing in front of us. The petrol station right outside my house has a little sign out saying pumps empty, shop open. That is not a sign of just people panic buying.
Yeah, I mean, in fairness, I didn't say that there hadn't been any delivery problem. Obviously, if pumps are running dry, and you have literally a distribution problem. When I said that, like the toilet roll supply issue, it wasn't the case that the nation's stock didn't exist. The issues about those supply chains, about getting the deliveries in time, and then when you have a perfectly a rational response to somebody doing, anyone, including people in government, doing the Corporal Jones, don't panic, don't panic. It's totally rational for people to then think, well, I want to get in before this becomes a bigger problem, at which point demand spikes to 400% more than normal. Interestingly, tomorrow's papers suggest it's down to somewhere like 60% more than normal, which is going to continue to pose some problems, but clearly is a sign of what I was just saying, which is that ultimately people run out of space to fill their car with petrol in most cases.
Yeah, and certainly it does appear that traffic is getting lighter as more people decide again to work from home. But the pictures in the metro, some of the minor elements, I presume, of violence there. As you can see, this is the one earlier, isn't it? This is somebody wielding a knife. Very awkward and dangerous situations. Grant Shapps also saying today that taking water bottles to petrol stations is dangerous and extremely unhelpful as people try and fill whatever methods they can. The sales of jerry cans increasing too. But the broader bits that you mentioned, picked up by the Daily Mail, Mark, Boris in a battle to save Christmas. The broader issue, if there is no fuel shortage, whether or not there's a fuel crisis, is that there is a shortage of HGV drivers, and that has a real knock-on in many sectors. And this short-term 3-month waiver of the visa is not going to cut it.
Well, so the experts in the field say, and the fact is that for the government and politically speaking, these are the basic, literally bread and butter issues of day-to-day life, and they are the kind of things where, frankly, if the system is running well, it's running properly, people don't notice it and they take it for granted. But that's how things ought to be. As soon as things start to slide, particularly when you get into questions of supply problems affecting Christmas and so on, that becomes, it affects millions of people negatively. And as a direct result, it becomes a major political threat. We already have issues around the rising livings been warning about for some months. And the government needs to grip that and grip it fast.
Well, after days of panic over petrol stocks, the Prime Minister said he was working on the necessary preparations to get the UK through the festive season and beyond. Grant Shapps suggesting the bringing in the army to familiarise themselves with the distribution of fuel was the 18th different separate measure they brought in so far, stretching right back to the spring. The question, I suppose now, Moya, is whether the people have confidence in these mechanisms to halt difficulties?
Well, they haven't halted any difficulties, so what mechanisms are really in place? I also think it's very ironic that the government are offering paltry 3-month visas to about 5,000 foreign drivers to try and tempt them back to the UK after measures they brought in the first place, which means they could no longer work in the UK. And now these drivers, along with drivers who are already based in the UK, say that they're not going to do it because conditions are just too poor for HGV drivers in this country. They were talking about conditions over in Europe where you don't have to pay to sleep. You have spaces to fill up. It's a lot more comfortable. The pay is higher. And I think it just speaks to a general neglect of workers that we've seen over the last few months, especially throughout the pandemic, and too little too late on the part of the government who don't care enough. And then when we're in crisis, they're suddenly scrambling to make it up, and it's just not good enough.
Yes, we saw issues with care workers getting to people they need to look after, cancer appointments as well, delayed by the fuel crisis, according to the Daily Telegraph. But when you go back to the message from the government, just go about your businesses as you would normally, and all of this will calm down. Are you optimistic, Mark?
Well, optimistic is a strong word after the last 18 months that we've all had. But, ultimately, some of these things will be resolved by practical action. Some of them will be resolved frustratingly by time. And as you were saying earlier, that psychological question, how do you deal with a panic? A shortage, and shortages can happen for a number of different reasons. They can be real to some degree, and then the fear of them that sparks perfectly logical for individuals panic buying then makes them even more acute. And as I was saying earlier, simply saying, don't panic seems to me like precisely the right way to make people panic more. So we are in a fix, and it's going to take some time to work itself out. Of course, add in, there's just been a global plague, which is going to have its own knock-on effects, as we all know, on all sorts of different manufacturing, supply chains, delivery, all sorts of parts of the economy too.
Well, lots of discussion about this, no doubt. We'll have more on that later this hour as well, but plenty more still to come. Maybe a little bit look at the papers, the pictures of Bond, but also Sir Keir Starmer to set out his vision for how Labour would govern Britain.
Everyone will be taking a lateral flow test, and we will be checking that at registration when they pick their running number. And in picking up their running number, they're going to hand over the bag of the kit that they want to wear once they've finished. This means that we have more space at the finish area on the mouth. And at the start, what we've done is put everyone into over 40 different waves of runners. So that we've spread the start over an hour and a half. So the course will be less crowded, and this is outdoors. Everyone will have had this lateral flow test, huge amount of money being raised for charity, and outdoors is the best place you could possibly be. We've had an incredibly difficult last 20 months. We've been in our homes, we've been missing being with people, we've been apart. That sense of community has been lost. And I think that with all the procedures that we've put in place, and we work with the government, the events research program that we put in place for an event that took place at Kempton Park back in May. Then we did one in July, the first closed road event in London later on in July, and then the Vitality Big Half in August. We've been gradually testing various procedures, getting these events bigger, and we are very confident with what we're doing. And people doing these events have been so happy to be able to be together, to feel safe, and to get that incredible sense of community. It is truly an amazing place to come to visit. I'm near Canada Gate. You might be able to hear the Canada geese behind me. And we've got elite athletes. We chartered a plane from Kenya and Ethiopia that arrived in Heathrow this morning. So the elite athletes have started to come in. And again, it is, we've got David Weir, the greatest athlete in the world in terms of the London Marathon. He won the mini marathon 6 times. He's won the marathon 8 times. He'll be back. And we're just so delighted to be part of this. This event is back after 889 days.
We don't understand that every lake or a pond is a habitat in itself, which houses frogs, snakes, crabs, turtles, birds, so many different life forms. Human beings directly depend on underground water source, So a lake or a pond is necessary to replenish these groundwater resources.
Welcome back. You're watching the press preview with me now, Moya Lothian-Mclean and Mark Wallace. Welcome back to both of you. The Guardian, one of the only newspapers to lead on Sir Keir Starmer, his moment of glory on Wednesday, didn't manage an in-person conference speech last year, of course. What's his job, Moya? What does he need to do?
Oh, God. He has a mountain to climb, I think perhaps even a larger mountain than the one he inherited in 2019, because he is now, much as Starmer used to talk about unity, he's now tellingly, according to his aides, replaced the word unity with winning in this speech, but in the process has abandoned all attempts at unity within the party. And much as he might try and pretend otherwise, he is handling a party bitterly divided and looks to have no plan whatsoever to bring them both back together and communicate a clear vision to the country. It's a lot of talk and hot air at the moment.
And what does he need to do to shake off Corbynism? Because that's what The Guardian suggests his aim is after that terrible drubbing in the last election.
Well, I think he's had more than a year to shake off Corbynism. I mean, Jeremy Corbyn is not even a part, he's lost the Labour whip. So we're still talking about Corbynism, but Starmer has yet to set out any Starmerism. You can't just keep going, I'm going to stop talking about this, I'm going to stop talking about this, and not set out a set of a clear winning vision that puts your stamp all over it. So maybe to stop talking about Corbynism, he should stop talking about it and set out his own plan.
Very quickly, Mark.
So, yeah, very quickly, the difficulty Keir Starmer really has is that his strategy is to basically be slow and quiet, not particularly interesting, things he's relatively well suited to, and hope that in time the government kind of messes up so badly that he becomes a viable alternative. And firstly, it hasn't quite worked so far. Luck, not being particularly good at politics, whatever you attribute it to. But in the meantime, his party is getting incredibly impatient and fractious and suspicious of him, as we've seen in the last couple of days. And I think he's really going to struggle, given his performance so far, to keep a lid on those pressures long enough for that strategy to eventually have a chance of bearing fruit.